climate change campaigners are demanding that Rishi Sunak commit up to £1 trillion in reparations to countries suffering from the effects of climate change, something the Prime Minister failed to address in his speech at the COP27 climate conference yesterday.
Yes, he talked about helping countries to adapt instead, but it comes, the call for reparations, as Nicola Sturgeon pledges that Scotland will pay £5 million towards vulnerable countries. And the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who's also at COP27, saying the UK cannot afford to pay reparations. At a time when the country is battling with the soaring cost of living, is now the right time to debate giving money to other countries to compensate for loss and damage because of climate change that was caused as a result of the Industrial Revolution?
Joining us now is chairman of the environmental think tank E3G, Tom Burke, who believes we have a moral obligation to help, as well as broadcaster Esther Kraku, who says that the UK cannot afford this.
Morning to both.
Let me just start with you, Tom. Last year at Glasgow, the Prime Minister committed over 5 years to spend £11.6 billion of British taxpayers' money to help developing countries adapt to climate change. Is this demand for reparations about the past over and above what the British government has already committed to spend? And do you think that calling it reparations for past damage as opposed to money to help countries make things better for the future is wise? Because it seems to be really winding up lots of people in Britain.
Well, I'm not surprised, but they're being wound up by a storm in the headlines. There is no call currently going on in Sharm, and no discussion going on in Sharm about reparations. There is a discussion going on about loss and damage, and as the Secretary-General said yesterday, we're on a highway to hell on climate change, and what the argument is about is do we have any responsibility to help those people who are a bit further down the highway than we are cope with the consequences of that? That's the debate that's going on in Sharm.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the charity War on Want is the one which is calling for the £1 trillion for reparations, reflecting the damage done to the planet by the UK burning fossil fuels to power our economy. It's the right thing to do. It's the moral thing to do. We should step up as a country and accept responsibility. It's not charity, it's not aid, said the leader of War on Want, Mr. Raymond. This is the UK accepting the harm it's created and repairing that harm.
Yeah, but that's War on Want's point of view. That's not the discussion that's going on in Sharm el-Sheikh. War on Want are perfectly entitled to their view, but that's not what's actually under discussion. What's under discussion is not how to pay for the past, but actually how to deal with the current problems. And remember, it's not just a moral issue. There is a moral responsibility, clearly, to deal with this. There's also practical issues. These are countries who are future markets. If they are damaged by climate change, then we're damaging our own future prospects. These are countries which, if their damage is bad enough, become failing states, then that leads to migration all over the world, and for us in particular. So there are real
What is it about this environmental debate at the moment? You know, I've been working in government and opposition, trying to do my bit to tackle climate change for 3 or 4 decades. But at the moment, you have War on Want saying trillion of reparations. You've got Stop the Oil blockading the M25, committing criminal damage, wanting to get arrested. It's like the environmental movement, or parts of it, sort of want to make themselves incredibly unpopular and undermine their case with lots of people who want to tackle climate change, but think this kind of language and campaigning is wrong.
Well, particularly if you're the young people in Stop and Oil, I do have a deep understanding of why they're so frustrated. They're the people who are going to live with the consequences of our failure to do what we know needs to be done and we know we can do. We've simply not got the political will, including by governments that you were part of, to actually deal with the problem. We do not have a technological problem with dealing with climate change. We don't have an economic problem. We have a real political problem.
So you think the blockades are a good thing?
I think the blockades draw attention to what the fact that politicians are not actually doing their part.
Esther Kraku, Tom says this isn't about reparations. That's one charity's call. But we do need to pay money from the foreign aid budget, presumably you would agree, to help countries to adapt. But what do you make of both of those points?
I think this is where we see the disconnect between the environmental lobby and the British public. And this is where they don't understand the average Briton. It's easy to sit and say, oh, let's conjure this money up to pay compensation or reparations or whatever semantics you want to use to these countries to tackle climate change. But the reality is we simply don't have that. There are millions of people in this country that are wondering.
Up. It's the aid budget.
No, but the thing is, we can't even afford that. We can't even afford that.
So you would cut the aid budget?
No, yes, I would actually.
Okay.
No, I would cut the aid budget because I think the Britain should come first. At the moment, we're wondering why are we housing asylum seekers in hotels when there are thousands of homeless people in this country that we can't take care of. We're cutting public spending, people's taxes are going up, but then we're talking about, paying reparations or compensation or whatever semantics you want to use to countries that really, that's not the priorities we should be tackling. I come from Ghana, I go home all the time. People still burn their rubbish behind my house. If you want to understand how to tackle climate change effectively, you need to make countries, developing countries, developed enough to actually care about that. Because when people in developing countries are wondering how to feed their families, their priority isn't a bunch of Western elitists saying, oh, you know what, let's hand these money down to these poor people at the bottom, and maybe they'll care about climate change. That's not their priority. I'm sorry.
But can I just put one thing to you, which is that some countries are so badly affected by climate change that they end up being refugees who want to come to the UK because the conditions have become so poor.
But then if that's the case, it wouldn't actually be the UK paying out the bulk of reparations. I don't even think we pay a significant proportion of that. It'd be places like China. Countries like China, Indonesia, India, a lot of these developing countries that are actually doing the bulk of the polluting, right? And if we have those conversations, you realize that the CCP is not going to encourage or entertain any conversation about them having to pay any reparations when their own economy is crumbling.
I've just received a notice that I'm going to get £500 to deal with the fuel crisis. I don't need that £500, like millions of other people in this country. That's just a bad policy choice. I'm very keen that the people who really are in trouble should get more money in this country. But you don't make a false choice between dealing with the problem that today and trying and somehow to think that will not
But what makes you think the average Brit wants to dedicate more money to this when they're finding it hard to get money? No, but here's the thing. Why don't you commit all of your money to this cause as opposed to telling average Brits who are finding it hard to get by to do this? Because this is the thing, you never put your money where your mouth is. You want to see average Britons
commit all his money.
No, commit all your money. Why don't you take the first step?
I'll tell you what I know about the average.
But why wouldn't you do that?
I'll tell you what I know about the average Brit. I'll tell you exactly what I know. And I know because they do it on television year after year, whenever there's sport aid, whenever there's Red Nose Day, and the average Brit is asked to help poor people elsewhere in the world. Even though they haven't had a pay rise for 10 years, they cough up that money. So I don't doubt the average Brit in the way you doubt the average Brit. I think the average Brit is a bit better than you are.
No, I'm sorry. They do it voluntarily, and they do it out of their own pocket that they think they can afford. No, but it is elitist because you're not willing to commit. He's not willing to commit his money to this. No, but are you going to commit your income? No, I'm sorry. Commit all of your money to this. Put your money where your mouth is, and then tell the average Brit that's finding it hard, that's having to choose between eating and heating, that they should do it. No, it's not a ridiculous argument. It's not a completely ridiculous argument. It's completely ridiculous argument. How dare you tell the average Brit living in a cost of living crisis to compensate or to pay reparations to these countries?
Commit all their money.
No, but that's exactly what you're doing because no one's voted for this. Who voted for this? Who's voted for this?
Commit all their money.
Who has voted for this? Who has voted for this?
Reflecting the fact that one charity is calling for £1 trillion to be paid in reparations. I mean, that is, practically the entire economy, £1 trillion.
No, but the point is, who has voted for this? This is the disconnect between the environmental lobby and the average Brit. But it's not convincing because you've not put forth a convincing argument. There are people, even if you do care about the climate, how do you expect people to be taken over by this argument?
The person you're arguing with who made the commitment yesterday was the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. I agree with you, he wasn't voted for by the people of this country, but he was voted for, and he is the legitimate leader of the country.
Neither was the net zero agenda.
There has been a consensus in our country for decades. David Cameron committed to 0.7% aid in the budget. Theresa May carried that on. Rishi Sunak says he wants to get back to that. There's been a consensus in our country across parties that taxpayers
across parties, not across the public. That's the difference.
Pay some of their money into the aid budget to help tackle poverty and environmental damage around the world. You are totally against that. You say we should only spend on British people here, and
I think
you
we should
reject that
we
whole...
should prioritize Britons. And I say, and I take offense with that because
It's not about climate change, it's just about anything.
No, hold on. I take offense to that because I'm not completely disconnected from people in the developing world, unlike a lot of people that sit there and make these
You just said you don't want any
and
money
promise
to be
away
spent on the aid budget.
the British taxpayers' money. But the point I'm making is we should prioritize Britons. It's a very hard case to make to us that there are people that are homeless in this country, thousands, the growing homeless.
Is the aid budget a good thing or not?
I don't think it's good in the way that it's done. I don't think it's good in the way that it's done. And I think the homeless population that's growing in this country, the fact that we're committing more money to this, we're asking how are we taking care of our countrymen?
Okay.
How is that happening?
Tom, we understand from other news sources that the M25 is once again blocked this morning because Just Stop Oil activists, we saw one of them yesterday in tears saying that she absolutely had to do this. Right now, you can see Esther's, worry about the cost of living crisis. It is reflected, I have to say, amongst viewers. The passion people feel for the climate is clashing with what other people see as their own personal circumstances and their struggle. People trying to get to work in order to earn enough money, in order to pay the tax, frankly, which then goes into the foreign aid budget, are being prevented from getting there.
And you're exactly right about it. There is a real clash of priorities. That's exactly why we elect politicians, to resolve that clash. And that's exactly why I said earlier, enormous amount of the failure here is for politicians to actually give the lead.
But let's be honest, Stop the Oil are making it easier for Esther and anti-aid, anti-climate change campaigners to make their point. It's a total own goal.
No, I agree with you that the frustration, it's hard to see how that frustration expressed that way doesn't create opportunities for people to criticize. But focusing on, as it were, the headlines as opposed to the issues is exactly what's at risk when we've got here. You're just talking about headlines and changing their headlines.
Headline is they block
not
the motorway.
the change.
They block the motorway.
No,
That's because they don't have a job. They're unemployed and they're privileged and they're entitled and they don't understand what the average Brit goes through to try and take care of themselves and their family. That's the disconnect.
I grew up in a council estate in Plymouth. Don't call me privileged.
Really? Because you're committing more of people's money that you don't earn.
Okay, we do have to leave it there. We do have to leave it there. We came close to a point of agreement and then we sort of sailed away from it again.
I don't, we were never anywhere near a point of agreement.
Tom, Esther, look, it's a really live debate and your points of view really do reflect the divide in the country over these issues.